So this time around we're going to try using Twitter Bootstrap. And Twitter Bootstrap is an excellent CSS library that allows us to make our web pages look far more professional, and to do so without having to write all the CSS classes ourselves. It's a great system and I use it extensively. It's not the only CSS framework. There are other really good ones like Foundation. But for the sake of simplicity and because this is such a good package, we're going to use Twitter Bootstrap in our application. And we'll be using it from now until the end of this course. So the first thing we have to do is install it. So I'm going to go back to my Atom editor. And this is right now the file we worked on last time. And I'm going to make this actually just get rid of all the stuff between the body tag, and get rid of all of this style tag and the hover min that we put in there a while ago. And I'm going to change the title to Acme, the infamous fictitious company, and you can call it whatever you want to, but I'm going to call it Acme and pretend that I'm building a website for an actual client. So the first thing I need to do is I'll go back to Twitter Bootstrap's website, and it's just getbootstrap.com, and I've put a link to that in the course resources. And I'm going to click on Download Bootstrap. But we're not actually going to download Bootstrap. What we're going to do instead is use this Bootstrap CDN. In other words, Bootstrap offers some servers where we can get all the CSS we need from them without actually having to download it and use it locally. Now in production, this is not always a great idea, and there may be compelling reasons why you would not want to use the CDN. But the end result is the same, and for the purposes of this course, we're fine to use this. So I've clicked on the download button, I've scrolled down to the Bootstrap CDN section, and now I'm going to copy this first link, the latest compiled and minified CSS, and I'm just going to get everything inside the link tag, copy it, switch back to my Atom editor, and in the head section, I'll paste that link, and that gives me the CSS. Now I'm going to go back and get one more thing, which we're not going to use immediately, but we'll be using it before too long. At the very bottom of this Bootstrap CDN section, we have the latest compiled and minified JavaScript. Now we haven't even looked at JavaScript yet, but we're going to be doing so before too long. So now's a great time to grab this link, copy it, switch back to your browser, and this time, rather than putting it in the head, old tutorials will tell you to put it in the head, but we're going to put it just before the closing body tag. And what this does is exactly the same thing that the link to the style sheet does. It goes to the address specified here, which is maxcdn.bootstrapcdn.com and so on and so forth, and gets the CSS. This goes to the same place, but it gets the JavaScript files that we're going to be using later on. Now it's not necessary to use JavaScript with Bootstrap. It's quite functional without it, but there are some great features which you can't have access to unless you install the JavaScript. So let's do that. So I'm going to save this, and just for fun, I'm going to go back to my web browser. I'll open a new tab, and then I'm going to open that index.html file I just created. So there it is. I'm in the correct folder, course website, open index.html, and it's absolutely blank. There appears to be nothing whatsoever in here. Well, that's because when we switch back to our Atom editor, we have nothing in the body tag except this script tag, which is invisible. The end user does not see it. That just tells the web browser that it needs to load that resource. So let's put some stuff in here. Now, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently because Bootstrap requires a certain syntax. Fortunately, it's pretty easy. The very first thing we're going to type is a div tag, and we're going to give that a class of, and this is a special Bootstrap class, container. And then I'll close that tag, just so I don't forget to later. And then in between those div tags, I'm going to create a new div called div class equals row. And I'll close that div so I don't forget to later. Now this row tells the web browser, using Twitter Bootstrap, that there are going to be certain things available between the opening and closing div tag. And the way that Bootstrap works is it logically breaks that row up into 12 possible columns. Well, we don't want to have 12 really narrow columns available on our web page. So what I'm going to do is create 3. And I'm going to create one called div class equals col md2, which stands for a medium column, 2 columns wide, so it spans 2 columns. and then I'll just close that. I'm going to leave it empty for now. Then I'll create one div class equals call md, I wish I could type today, md8, and I'll close that. And then I'll create a third column, div class equals call md2, and I'll close that. Now these are all empty, so if I save this and go back to my web browser and reload, I still shouldn't see anything, and I don't. So let's go back and put some content in here. And just to see how this looks, in the first column, I'm going to put an h1 tag called call1, h1. In the middle one, I'll put another h1 tag called h1 main content, h1. And then in the third one, I'll put another h1 tag called h1 write call. So let's look at this. In the first narrow column, I should see something called call1. In the middle column, which is much wider, I should see a heading saying main content. And in the rightmost column, I should see one saying h1, or an h1 tag that gives us a heading called write call. So let's save that, go back, and reload. And that works. Now there's something you probably noticed right away, and that is that the font these are being displayed in is very different from the font that was displayed using the default h1 tags. That was a serif font. It was like Times New Roman or something like that, whereas this is a font that's much cleaner. And this is the default font for Twitter Bootstrap. And this applies to more than just the heading tags. So let's go in here and try some of those HTML tags we're familiar with from our earlier lessons. So let's try something like, oh, I don't know, a table. So I'll create a table, and I'm going to use a different syntax than I did last time. It's just adding something. Rather than jumping right into rows and cells, I'm going to create a section called thead. And then I'm going to create a row. And it works exactly the same as the other ones, except that instead of typing TD for the cells, I type TH for the cells. And I'll call this username, TH. And then I'll have another one called TH phone number, TH. I'll close my TR tag, I'll close my thead tag, and now I'll get to the part we're used to. But again, we're going to wrap that in something that tells the web browser this is the body part of the table. And that's called, as you might expect, tbody. And now it works exactly like we saw last time. TR, TD, and the first user is John Smith. And John Smith's phone number is, well, let's go with 555-1212. Close that TD tag, close the TR tag, close the tbody tag, and I'll close the table tag. Now just so we'll have more than one row, I'm going to copy this row of information, paste it after the row that I already have, and we'll change the name to Jane, oh, better spell that right, Jane Jones. And her phone number is 555-5555. Now I'll save that, go back, and let's see what Twitter Bootstrap does with tables. So I go back to my content, and I reload it. And that's pretty ugly. That's not what I was hoping to get from Twitter Bootstrap, which has such a great reputation. Well, there's a simple reason why it doesn't look the way we want it to look. Let's go back here and do exactly what we need to do. And that is to tell the web browser that this table is going to use one of Twitter Bootstrap's classes. And the class name for table is pretty self-evident. It's called table. Now, just by adding that one attribute to the opening tag for the table, let's go back and see what happens when we reload our page. Now that is far more attractive. You'll notice how the part that's in the T-head, those are the table headings, they're bold and it has a slightly thicker underline than the cells, which are in plain text, and are separated by lines. That looks really good. Now let's make the table a little bit longer, and I'm not going to bother changing the information, I just want more rows. So I'll copy both of these rows and paste them in a few times. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now let's go back and reload that table. It's a longer table, still looks very good. And let's add another class to the table. Remember, we can apply more than one CSS class to an element. Well, we have table. Let's add table striped and save that go back, and reload. And notice how you get a slight gray background and alternating rows. Now this is the real advantage of using a package like Twitter Bootstrap, is you have all of these carefully designed classes that look really good. Now there's one other thing I want to draw to your attention here, and it's really kind of interesting, and it's really cool. A lot of people will access websites you build using standard laptops or desktop computers. But a lot of other people are going to access your website using different devices, like tablets, like phones. And what I'm going to do here is change the size of this browser window to a much smaller one. Now watch what happens to the content. See how it jumps a little bit? It starts changing column sizes. Now look at that. When I got to this size, the column that was on the left now is at the top. And the column that was on the right now is on the bottom. It's automatically reformatting our content to something that's going to be visible regardless as to the kind of device I use to access the website. So I've got this site small enough now, or this window small enough now, that it's about the size of an Android phone or an iPhone. And the content is still all accessible. It reformats automatically. That's one of the really neat things about Bootstrap. Let's have a look at a couple of other features before we turn our attention away from to the next topic. I'll go back to my Atom editor, and I'm going to go back to this call 1. And just to make it a little more obvious, I'm going to change the name from call 1 to left call for the leftmost column. And this div that holds all of the content for our leftmost column, the one that has call MD2, I'm going to add another class to that, and that class is called well. Now well doesn't seem like a very descriptive title, but let's switch back to our browser, reload this content, and see what well does. And well wraps it in a kind of gray shadowed box. No, not shadowed, gray box. And it just sets it apart as different kind of content. Okay, let's try something else. Now we looked at links a while ago, and links are pretty easy to write. Let's write a link just below our table. So I find the closing table tag, and I'll make a link to Google. Well, let's put it in a paragraph tag so it's set off by itself, and I'll write my link. href equals http://www.google.com. Go to Google, close that, and close my p tag, and let's see what Twitter does with links. Let's reload our page, and that's not very exciting. Well, it does have one difference. When I roll over it, it gets an underline, it gets slightly darker, but that really doesn't set it apart. Well, don't despair. There are kind of really interesting styles we can apply to this. So let's go back here, and I'm going to add 2 styles to this link. Remember, you can add a class wherever you want to, so I can add a class to an ahref link. I'll give this class equals btn for button, and then I'm going to put another class after it, btn-primary. Oops. So there's my attribute. I've added 2 classes to this link. One that says btn, which is shorthand for button, and then btn-primary, which obviously stands for primary button. Let's see what that does. Go back to my web browser, reload this, and it turned it into something that looks and acts just like a button. Well, that's really good. What if we wanted to use something other than a blue button? I'll go back here, and I can put button danger instead of button primary. Okay, save that, switch back to the web browser, reload, and now it changes it to a red button. Well, that is cool. Now, these are only a couple of the many features that we're able to use with Twitter Bootstrap. And we'll get to some more as the lessons go on. But even these few things have really changed the way that our content looks from something that's amateurish. It's beginning to have that polished, professional look. And as we go on, we're going to spend more and more time and pay more attention to making things look good in addition to making them functional. Well, that's enough for this time. Next time we'll go back to our login form, and we'll try to create something that looks and feels like a professional login form. And then we'll build the back end that allows us to actually make it functional.